Storytelling isn't a soft skill, it's a foundational one. Stories speak to the parts of us that explanation can't reach. In this episode of the Essential Coaching Skills podcast, I unpack why metaphor, storytelling, belongs at the heart of effective coaching. You are listening to the Essential Coaching Skills podcast. That's right, storytelling. I will admit I am a sucker for stories. People who coach with me will tell you. I tell a lot of stories, but I do that for a very, very important, I think, reason. I think stories bypass the conscious critical mind. It gets into a place where we are living the story with the other person. I think, and I have evidence to back this up, that we learn from experience. We actually learn from experience. Metaphor slips past resistance. The listener doesn't have to agree or disagree. The meaning emerges internally because we're living it. The stories feel safer than directives. Giving advice, I've often said, advice is cheap. But therapy, good coaching, takes money, costs money. It's really true. I think that when we learn from experience, you've all ever heard this expression that we learn from our mistakes. We learn from our experience. We learn from everything that we do. Stories are the next best thing to doing something. So if you actually do a firewalk experience, if you do an experience where you do some mountain climbing or something, you learn from that experience, right? But if you hear a story about doing a firewalk, and you have never done one before, but if you hear a really good story about mountain climbing and the challenges therein, it's the next best thing. It's the next best thing. We learn from that experience. And, of course, if you do it in hypnosis, if you put a person into a trance before you tell those stories, then, they're probably experiencing it even more deeply. It's like a waking dream, if you will. They experience even more deeply. Stories have that ability. They grab the attention of the person, and you can direct it with your stories. So it's really very, very important. Some of the stories I've told here in the podcast previously are stories that I will tell to clients when I'm doing coaching with them. You've heard them if you've been a listener here over the years, because I sometimes go back to the same stories over and over again. And yet, because, human experience is common, we have very human experiences. All of us have similar challenges in life, relationships, getting ahead in life, finding out who we really are, all those things. They're very, very important and true for everybody. So the same stories can be relatable, There are other opportunities, other situations where the person has a fairly unique situation, and you need to have the ability as a coach to, find the right story, even if you're creating one for the first time, making up a story. There's a way of doing this in Ericksonian hypnosis that David Gordon put forth called a isomorphic metaphor, that you create a story that's parallel, matching to the client's experience. But it's not the same story. You're telling a story about maybe, a cat and a dog instead of a person, or you're telling a story about a, captain on a seafaring mission, in this kind of story that you make up. But it parallels their experience so much that their brain is going like, oh yeah, that makes total sense to me, right? But you're not giving them advice. You're not telling them what to do. You're not giving them directives, right? So the sessions feel lighter and yet deeper at the same time. I think clients relax and they engage. There's less resistance and more curiosity. I think that when you give directives, when you give suggestions, when you give, homework assignments kind of thing, I think people can have resistance to that. Some people can, clearly. Maybe you're one of those people, but, some people do have resistance. Like I said, advice is cheap. If you want advice, you go to your mom, right? But coaching, it's not just about insight. It's about finding directions. It's about finding out who you are. One of my favorite coaching questions to ask people, and when they're experiencing life as they do, is I'm saying, well, who are you being in this experience? Who are you being in this experience? We all know from the logical levels that Robert Dilts put together, called them the neurological levels, that identity, if it's not at that highest logical level, it's really close. Our beliefs about who we are, you know, I'm an honest man, or I'm, strong, or I'm adventurous, or I'm, curious, or I'm funny, or, whatever these things, that's who I am, these I am statements. Sometimes we are in a situation where we're not being particularly effective. And if you ask a person, well, who are you being in that situation? They might say, oh, wow, gosh, I'm being that little kid, right? Who's afraid to, the bully might beat him up or something. There's stories that they have from their past, and they're being that little kid again, right? So if we can help them discover that and then change the story, right? So that little kid becomes, a superhero, right? They become a superhero, and you change the story so they thrive in the story. It's very cool, because then the person in their brain, just a little part of the brain way back in the side of it, is just going to start going like, yeah, that's me. I'm that superhero. I can do that. What's also great about stories is that you can tell the same story to different people, and they'll have different insights or explanations to themselves about what it is about, even if you're telling them those stories at the exact same time. So, in other words, you could tell a story to a group of people. You could be doing a stage presentation. You could do a public speaking event, group coaching, right? And you tell the same story to everybody at the same time. You tell the story to the audience. And everybody in that audience really feels like they're experiencing it, because that's what stories do, right? So if I talk to you about, riding a bicycle, up a hill, and then coming down the other side and going really, really fast, it's so fast I was almost afraid I'd go out of control. You've probably had a somewhat similar experience in yourself, in your life, so that you put yourself on that bike, you go down that hill, you're feeling that experience, right? Everybody else is also. They're seeing a different bike, they're seeing a different hill, they're seeing, different time of day, different place. It's all different, but it's also all the same, and they're interpreting it and making meaning of it in a way that's meaningful to them. And it could be very similar, because human beings have similarities. We have human experiences. It could also be very, very different, couldn't it? But it's personal to that person, and they will take it and make the meaning that is right for them. So that's one of the powers of stories, is that they will make the meaning that's right for them. And I think that's for me, one of the hallmarks of coaching is that it's like Milton Erickson used to say, that every person is as individual as their own thumbprint, right? Everybody has their own uniquenesses. Everyone's as individuals as their own thumbprint. Everybody's different. And we want to coach not to a place where we're putting somebody into the same kind of template, same sort of, method, and you follow my coaching method, and I'll teach you how to be a great person, whatever. You don't have to do my thing, but I help you to find your thing, help you to find your power, your strength inside, right? I think everybody has that. I had a coach once. I used to run a lot in marathons and 5Ks and stuff. And I had a coach here in Brooklyn named Harry Murphy. And Harry was an amazing guy. He was a runner, and one of the early adapters, back in the 60s and 70s. He was running. Nobody else did that. He was one of the first organizers of the New York City Marathon. He, in fact, plotted out the first interborough course, starting in Staten Island, going across the Verrazano Bridge and into Brooklyn and through Queens, and then into Manhattan, and then back up into the Bronx, and then back into Manhattan, finishing at Central Park. He laid that out. Fred LeBeau, the founder of the New York Roadrunners Club, said, Harry, can you do this for me? And he did. He was a navigator in the Army during World War II. So he knew how to take maps and compasses and figured all that out. He's an amazing guy. And he started the Prospect Park Track Club, which is an ironically named club because we don't have a track in Prospect Park, but most people run marathons in the Prospect Park Track Club. But nevertheless, we would do these coaching things. He would coach us on Wednesday mornings. We'd go over to this hill by the picnic house, and he'd also teach us on Sunday mornings. We'd do long runs. He'd sometimes drive up to Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx. But the reason I'm telling you this story is that Harry had this amazing gift for coaching all the different people, and they were all wanting the same thing to, be better runners or be better marathoners, but coach them in the way that was unique to each person. The way he gave feedback for one person, be like, "Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty good for you." That's what he did to me all the time. And then other people, he'd be like so like supportive and effusive and like, "Wow, that was really great. Congratulations, Maya. I'm so proud of," just waxing on about this stuff. Um, because he had a sort of innate gift for knowing what people really needed to be motivated, right? People can be motivated by different things. People can be moving away from, people can be moving towards, you know? So, what is it that motivates you? What motivates this particular person? And the coach should be able to find that, and be able to coach their coachee, their client, in the way that is best for them. Find the story that's best for them, you know? So I like to use stories for so many things in coaching, and I invite you to do so as well. Because the other thing about coaching is that about stories with coaching is that you can really make it in a way that's non-instructional, that they discover things for themselves. And my belief is that when people discover things for themselves, they keep it, right? They've come to this conclusion, this experience for themselves. They keep it. It's their own experience. It's theirs. It's not something that you told them to do and they're trying to do it right, you know? Storytelling makes change feel human. It's not something that you're forced to do. We've talked in the past few weeks about how, willpower is one thing you make yourself do, but stories help you to sort of get in alignment of, this is just naturally what I do. This is who I am being in this experience. This is what I do when I'm being that person, right? So this is what I do when I'm being that person. So when you find that identity of who you are, what you do just naturally flows from that. And that's the story, right? Stories have a place, they have an environment where they take place. Stories have, an action that takes place. There are motivations and realizations that take place. One of my favorite things to do in a story is to have the hero of the story, the person in the story, have a realization, because then you can do some interesting Ericksonian language pattern type stuff, where you sort of do embedded commands and, slip things in a little deeper than they would just normally in a story. So you can enhance the stories with Ericksonian hypnotic language patterns. And one of those language patterns that works just great, I don't even know if it has a name. I call it the realization pattern. That's how I think of it. But it is where your hero of your story, the person in your story, suddenly realizes that, and then you do the IU switch. So that's the pattern. They suddenly realized that, ... And then you say some embedded command like, you can do anything in life. George just realized that because he'd ridden his bike down that hill so fast and lived to talk about it, that he realized that, you will survive. Even when things go downhill, you'll come up the other side. If you fall down 10 times, you get up. That's a funny expression, by the way. People say this: if you fall down 5 times, you get up 6 times. That actually doesn't work. If you fall down 5 times, you get up 5 times. It's an interesting motivational sounding quote. It makes no sense whatsoever. If you fall down 6 times, you can't get up 7. Just saying. It's also good to have humor. That's another probably subject that we could do going forward. Humor is good. Humor is important. So yeah, so for you listening to this right now, maybe you could ask yourself some questions like, what story are you currently living inside of? We often feel, I think, that we have a story that we're living right now. We're telling ourselves a story. What story are you telling about the struggle that you're going through? That you're good enough, that you'll overcome it, or Maybe not. Maybe this has all been a ruse up till now. Now people are finding out that you really aren't so skilled. What story are you telling yourself? What metaphor might describe this change more kindly? What story can you find for yourself to make it better? To find those resources that you need inside to make this change the way you want it to be. I invite you to think along those lines, because stories can be something we tell ourselves as well, can't they? And then when you change your own story, it goes a long ways. So that's my little spiel for today. I hope that you liked this little solo podcast about doing different things differently in coaching. Storytelling is one of the big things I think that everyone should learn how to do in coaching. And of course, supplanting it and making it, enhancing it with Ericksonian hypnotic language patterns is something that's pretty awesome as well. In fact, I consider it to be an essential coaching skill. So please tune in to the Essential Coaching Skills podcast in the future. Like it, subscribe. That'd be awesome. We really would appreciate that more than we can tell you. And come visit us over at essentialcoachingskills.com. Maybe want to become a member. We have storytelling classes starting, really soon. I don't know when you're listening to this one. Maybe it's already started, but you can still join it. Still be a member. Learn NLP, learn hypnosis, learn sleight of mouth, learn storytelling. There's a lot of new things coming your way down the pike as well. And how to use havening as an example in your own life, to change the story of victimhood. And, instead of, post-traumatic stress, you can have post-traumatic growth. That's certainly a possibility. So I invite you to join us and hope to see you real soon. Thanks. This has been the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Hope to see you again real soon. Come back next week when we have another gripping and exciting episode of the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. And if you want to, you can find out more about us, each and every one of us, at essentialcoachingskills.com. Thanks.